like I said, I was going to make a hanging today, and I saw a few comments about people using the mushroom house here. I'm wondering what colours to use to make it Christmassy. So I've got a couple of different colour combinations. This one and plus the one that I'm going to demo for you. They're very similar, but I think it just might be interesting for you to see them side by side. See, I've actually made a hanging, so I've got no words on this today. So you can make this into an aperture card equally. If you don't have the acetate, I think it would work really well with vellum as well. Obviously, if you don't have that either, then just a hanging onto a nice piece of background card I think would also be lovely. But I've used a bit of ribbon. I've double-sided this as well. What I wanted to show is that you can perhaps use this for Christmas. So I haven't used any glitter on this at all. You can perhaps use glitter for the roof, but I think just using the colours, I think you can make this quite Christmassy. And if I bring in the one that I'm actually going to demo today, there's very slight difference in this, and I think it will depend on the background that you put it on as to how Christmassy this looks. This one that I've made, I've used rhubarb jam as the red colour, so it's got a really pinky red tone to this, which is really quite deep. But this one I've used the strawberry sundae, so I think that might be a really useful comparison for you as well. So as you can see on this one here, I've got two images. They mirror each other exactly, so I've hidden all the workings and all the adhesive behind each of the houses. Now to do this, I would have had to have stenciled the house twice, obviously. This version of the house is the correct way round, or the way round that Lisa has designed it. Obviously, if I turn this round, it's a mirror image. So this is the image that I'm going to stencil for you today. Just to show you again, I've done it previously on other YouTube videos, but just to show you that you can actually stencil a reverse image and die cut it. You don't necessarily get the embossing, but you can deboss. So I think that's just a really useful technique for you to be able to see. I'll just run through what I've used. Obviously the mushroom house, so this is the 3D embossing folder, which comes really helpfully with the die also. So that's an A6 size. We have the stencils that go along with this. Now these stencils are also A6 size. You get full-size packaging on those. And then for the acetate die around the outside, you can use any of the circle dies that you may have that fit. So on this one I've used the nested scallops, and I've used the very largest circle. But on the next piece of acetate I've actually used the outline die on the circle and ornamental. So don't be stuck if you don't have any sort of nesting circles. If you have these ornamental ones, then you can just use that. I mean, that in itself is a beautiful die without taking all the really decorative features from the rest of the set. So mix and match and see what you have. If you don't have circles, then hearts, squares, rectangles would work equally well, and possibly even the oval. I haven't matched up the oval in size to that, but I'm sure you could make that work one way or another. Okay, so we have 9 stencils in this set. Now obviously I've already stenciled one. I want to create the reverse image, so I need to make sure that I flip each of my stencils over to use them, okay? So to do this, I'm just going to make sure my pegs are at the top. Now I will possibly rotate my Ultimate a little bit later on, and it will make, as and when I do, it will make sense as to why I'm doing that. So I'm just going to line up my cardstock, make sure my mat actually is pushed right up. This is actually quite key to making sure that everything all lines up. Your mat is quite mobile on the inside, but it fits snugly. So when you first start stenciling, it's always really a good practice to make sure it's really pushed up and really butted up as far as it can go up to the pegs, because that means that will give you the best opportunity to line up each of your stencils for each of your layers. So stencil number 1, we have, this is the correct way round. I'm going to make sure, I want to make sure that all of my numbers are facing down this time to get the reverse image. So obviously we're going to start off with the foliage. I'm going to use a mixture of woodland moss and garden sage. So I'm going to start off with garden sage and just stencil that in. I'm going to a lightish layer of this. Always when there's foliage, I do like to have 2 tones of foliage, just to give a clear distinction. There's different ways of doing this, but this time around I'm using 2 different colours. So first base is with garden sage, and then I'm going to come in over the top with woodland moss, and it just gives that a lot more earthy feel, a lot darker green. Now obviously you can choose your favourite version of green. So we can have that like that, and I'm going to put the garden sage on the bottom as well. I'm actually really loving these chunky stencil brushes. They're so solid in your hand, so lovely to work with. I'm going to do that and then make sure I just have a little shaded effect with the woodland moss just at the base of all of this foliage here. So we have stencil number 2. So flip this over. So we're working on the back of the stencils essentially, but as long as you work on the back of every single stencil, then your image is going to come together just as it would normally. Now, this position, I'm going to be stenciling the main area of the house, or the body of the house. Now on this first one, I've used almond frosting, and it gave a really nice, warm, cosy glow. Let me just hold that up a little bit more to the camera for you so you can see that. On this particular one, I'm going to use garden sage. I just wanted to try it and see if it can give a slightly more sort of festive feel to it. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use what's on my stencil brush initially. Oh, excuse me. And just work around the outside. Now I don't want to have a green body to the house. I just want like a cast of a shadow under here, so that's why I'm going to go really light. So the middle of the house is actually going to be left unstenciled, so sort of have a white sort of halo as it were. But what I will do, just on the base here where the foliage is going to sit, I'm just going to go slightly heavier and just work just at the base of the house there, and just go slightly darker, just really gradually, so it's not sort of in your face, so it's acting as shadow as it were. And I'm just going to try and just get a slight darker halo just around the door. And you can do this by just keep working the brush and the remaining ink that you have on there just on that door area, and you will eventually get a really airbrushed halo type of look around that area of the stencil. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but on the base of the house, which is where the roof will actually cast a shadow on the top there. So I'm going to do exactly the same here. Now I appreciate at this stage, let me just turn that around just so as you can see what I'm doing. There we are. Now at this stage it looks like you're probably not putting an awful lot of ink down, but when I take the stencil away you'll see the amount of shading that's going on. And I'm just going to create a similar effect just down the side, but less apparent. And you can see that there's a white halo staying in the centre of the house, and that just acts to make the outside areas look a lot more shaded. So I'm just conscious I don't want to have my hands in the way, so I'm just going to move that again. And hopefully if I can work like this now, there we are. I really don't want, yes, that's it. Just making sure that my hand isn't in the way. There we are. So I'm just going to work. So I'm really just making sure that the edge of the brushes are just tipping over the edge of that stencil there. So when I take that away, you can see we have a really subtle colour on that house. It's not in your face green or whatever colour that you've used, because you still have that really nice halo in the centre there. And it doesn't take that long to do. So stencil number 3, we add some detail into the centre of the leaves there. Now what I've done before, just to add a little bit of gold, because we can, because it's Christmassy, I'm just going to use a little bit of charcoal gold. Now I'm not going to go too mad because it makes it go too dark. But what this will do, it'll add the shadow into the centre of that foliage, but obviously when it's tilted towards the light you'll get that gold sheen, so that's really pretty. And I just used what was on the left on my sponge, so that was charcoal gold. Any of the greens or any of the colours that you may have would work. I think there's a grey that would work. There's a magic, is it Magic Garden that's green also? That would look lovely. Now we come to the door, and I am going to make these green also so they coordinate with the house. I'm all for coordinating. I might try and go just slightly darker than the body of the house that I've just done, just to make sure it stands out. I should concentrate on creating a little bit darker into the corners, just so as you've got a little bit of shading going on there, and also work the green into this door as well. There we are. Stencil number 4, we have more foliage. Now before I do this, I'm just going to check how my foliage is looking there already. So I might come in with a little bit darker on this one, just to make sure that it really stands out. So again, these stencil brushes really enable you to control the amount of ink that's going down. So I'm going to make sure that goes down a lot darker than we have done before. Stencil 5, this is where we start creating and bringing in some colour. Now I'm going to use my strawberry Sundae, and I'm going to come in bold and really make that nice and bright. So as soon as you start introducing red with your greens, I think it immediately starts making it look Christmassy. And that they work so well together, those colours. Now if you actually see, this is going to actually work out to be a lot darker than the colour I've got here, but I think that makes that interesting. So stencil number 6, again you have the other layer to the flowers that we've just added, so therefore I'm going to make them just a bit lighter, because with the same colour, so they coordinate. And now we come on to stencil 7, so this is going to make a lot of impact. So we're really going to introduce the roof and also the tops of the toadstools or the mushrooms elsewhere. But looking at this stencil, we also have the frame to the door, which I want to be just as bold as everything else, but we also have the windows here. Now what I want to do there, I don't want to come in as bold as the rest of the stencil, so I'm just going to use the ink that's on my brush, the red, and I'm just going to just add a little glow to those windows, like so. Let me just take that away. You can just see how that's sitting there on the stencil. You'll see why in a second when I come on to the next stencil, why I didn't want to go too bold on that. But what I will do now, something I don't usually do, I'm just going to mask those windows not with that one, I've got a piece that I was using earlier. I'm going to mask those windows with just I'm using washi tape. Now obviously Lisa has just brought out her masking tape, so if you have that, that will be the ideal thing to use. I'm waiting for mine to come through. So just take a tiny little bit and just cover those windows. And I'm going to turn my Ultimate so I can work this way. And with a Wonder Brush, I'm going to now take a lot of the red ink, really go to town, because I want to make this roof of the mushroom house pop as much as I can. So I want to get as much coverage onto this roof as is possible with the tools that I have. So spend a bit of time just building up this colour, to keep going back to your ink pad there, just picking it up and just building up a really nice even amount of colour. Now it may also be worth at this stage, which is why I actually turn the Ultimate around, is just to take a piece of copy paper, because that will just enable you to mask off the rest of everything else and just hold that stencil in place without getting your fingers too dirty. And this also controls at this stage where the ink is going, because all we want to do at the moment is just concentrate on making this roof as bold as possible with your red. Now I don't know what colour you prefer. I really did like the Rhubarb Jam. That worked so well. It's a real pinky colour on there, but when you actually put it on sort of really intensely and looking at the camera there, that is really, really dark. So the other colour that might be worth trying if you have it is Loganberry. I think that would look stunning as well. So we have a really nice coverage there, and you'll know when you can't get any more colour on that. You'll start seeing that the blending that you're doing isn't making any other effect. So that's how I know I have enough colour on there. So now I can go back to my smaller stencil brush and put on the intense colour onto the tops of the mushrooms here. Now I've moved on to a stencil brush, I've got a lot more control over where I'm putting the ink, so I can take away those mask areas now, because I want to come in bold around the door frame like so. And I'm also going to do the rest of where the foliage is going, because I don't think you can go too wrong with a bit of red foliage at Christmas. I mean, if you think of the poinsettias, I think that works really well. Now there are some stones at the bottom of here, so I'm going to use my really small stencil brush, and I've got tree bark here, which is the darkest brown that we've got in the collection. I think it came from collection number 2, and I'm just going to add a little bit of brown there. Now it doesn't matter if that brown mixes with the red, because obviously they are very similar shades to each other. So I can add that really nice dark brown, and that just adds a really nice grounding contrast to the bottom of this stencil just here, I think. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, before I stop using this stencil, I'm just going to give this a little clean. So I'm just going, excuse me, I'm just going to take all that red away. And then I can replace that back on my image like that. And I'm going to come back in with my larger stencil brush and the garden sage, pick up just a little bit of ink, and you can either work all around the top of the roof or just on one side to add a bit of shading, but just a little bit of ink and just work like I did before, My hands are in the way again, aren't they? Just before, just work onto the side, and this is going to add a little bit of shading. It's just going to give that little bit of shadow on the top of that roof. I don't know if you can see on the one here that we have just that little bit of darkness just going on. It just adds a little bit of dimension to that roof, and it works really well on top of the red there. Now I find red really hard to shade generally. If I'm using alcohol markers and I'm trying to get shade in, I find it really hard. So I sort of came in with that mentality when I was using red ink. But Lisa's inks blend so well together, because I think because of the chalky nature of them, that's what they've all got in common. It means that you can take a darker colour. I mean, you wouldn't know that I'm blending a green on top of that red, would you, really? But it just gives you that bit of dimension when I take that away. And it just gives the roof just a little bit of something. So stencil 8, make sure I put this on the reverse again. We're going to come in with the details for the window. Now I'm doing this in red because I think it works. It's Christmas, artistic license, it works really well. So I'm going to come in quite heavily with the red on there. And you'll see why, excuse me, oh dear, I've gone croaky. You'll see why in a second, why the first layer of ink I put through the window was very light. We have some areas just below the roof here. You want to put a little bit of red in there, but not too much, because otherwise it will blend with the rest of the house. And there's a couple of extra mushrooms here as well, so you want to come in really deep and bold with the red on those. Now if you're using this for any other occasion, then you can really go to town and add lots of colours on these levels. But as I say, I think because I'm doing Christmas, the more red I can add, I think the more of a festive feel that can give. Now I'm going to come in with the small tree bark again, so I'm going to put the details into the windows of this little house here. The base of these windows, I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow with a brown, and just push it up into the base there where it looks like the windowsill may be. And I put the ink on the plastic first, or on the stencil first, and just push that in over the edge there. So that's what gives me the control over the ink there. There's a few stones at the bottom here, so I'll add just a layer of ink at the base of the house there too. And just add that in. And then I think I might finish off with a bit of shading into the top of these mushrooms as well, just so they match the main roof there. Doesn't need to be a huge amount of colour. And I'll just add that in perhaps into the base of the roof also. There's a little bit of foliage there, so I think I might just come in really quite dark with those. So, and I can take that away. It's already looking very different to this side. So now we've come on to our last stencil here, stencil number 9, and this is where we put the detail on top of the house. Now, I always think that it's nice to have white tops to these mushrooms houses. We do have the white opaque ink, which if you bought the mushroom house and the stencils from Lisa's website, they would have come as a package. So you would have got the pigment ink, the opaque white pigment ink. So this is brilliant to go over the red. This is what I've used here. But also, just before I add that, just to make sure that the whiteness really does come through, what you can do is use or take advantage of the fact that these inks are water reactive. So take yourself some tissue, some soft tissue or a microfiber cloth, and you can wet this. So I'm just using a spray bottle and just wetting my cloth and I'm just pressing that in through the stencil, and what that will do is lift some of the ink that you've already added. Now you don't want to oversaturate because it will creep in through under the stencil, and it'll also not necessarily react too well with the super smooth cardstock. But if you control it by using a cloth, not saturating it so it's dripping, but wet enough, you can see already before I've lifted the stencil off. So you can just lift that through there. Might be a little bit trickier on these smaller ones because the holes are a lot smaller, but just give it a try. And also you don't want to wet that too much because we want to continue working with our image here. So when I lift this away, you will see that some of that ink has lifted and just giving you a lighter area. Now them white spots aren't bold enough, but what it has done is take away some of the redness. So when you come to add the white pigment ink, if you have that, then you're working on a lighter base. Now if you don't have the white pigment ink, you can stencil straight through this with a gold, I think might be quite nice, or a darker. You could probably go quite dark with a garden sage. Or what you could do, you can use the stencil as a template, and you can either rub through or blend through some clear ink. So you can heat emboss and add some white embossing powder or silver embossing powder. That would work really well. Or you could use the stencil and just add dobs of glue through here, and then you could sprinkle glitter on that. So there's various different ways of doing that. You could also, if you have a white pen, instead of inking through these holes, you can use a white pen through the stencil here. I think that would equally work as well also. But I do have the white ink here, so I will show you how that goes on. I've dedicated a brush just for my white ink, pretty much as I have done with my anthracite ink. So this will always stay. So hopefully I will keep my ink pad looking as pristine as it is. Don't hold me to that. I perhaps stencil now the white ink through that, because you've already lightened the ink underneath. It's really going to give that ink, the white ink, the best chance of really glowing through. Let's see, so the stencil brushes are also great at getting through these little smaller areas on the stencil as well. Okay. Now this white ink is slow drying, so if you wanted to also actually, you could possibly use this as an embossing ink. So if you had white embossing powder and the rest of the layers of ink were dry, you'd have to make sure that the white ink was dry. No, sorry, you'd have to make sure that the red ink was dry first. You could stencil through the white and then sprinkle the white embossing powder over the white opaque ink. I think that would work really well as well. And that will just really sort of highlight those white spots on the roof also. So we have our embossing folder and our die cut. Now obviously our die cut doesn't work that way around. We do need to die cut it this way, which would suggest a die cutting from the reverse, which if we were to do it like this, you could either hold it up to a light source or a window and try and line it up that way, but that can actually be really quite awkward. So the way that I found is best to do this is to emboss it first, or run it through the embossing folder. Now again, our conventional way of using our embossing folder would be to put it this way, but we've got to match the image up, obviously, so that works. So it does mean that this particular image is going to be debossed, but for the sake of having it a little bit different, I don't think that really matters at all. So we can line that up in our folder just as well as if we were embossing it. It's just going to have a slightly different finish. So our image has been debossed. If I turn that over there, you can actually see the emboss on the other side. Now what this enables us to do, it gives us something to line our die up with, you see? And you know that that is now going to correspond exactly to the image that is on the other side. So make sure that we tape this into place, because obviously we don't want this to shift. So make sure that that stays in position. And we can die cut this. I'll take this out of my cutting plates. Can take our die away. I shall keep you all in suspense for a little bit. Fingers crossed it works. I'm pretty sure it will. Okay, make sure to take our die away. Obviously that comes away perfectly. So when we turn this over, we have a perfectly die cut reversed image, and that is such a lovely way to get a mirror image of our die cuts. And I think that's a really nice technique to use whichever die set and embossing folder set you are using. Now we could just secure these two together like that with a little bit of ribbon in the middle, and that in itself I think would be a really nice hanging. Again, you could put this into an aperture of the card, a bit like the swing cards I was making the other week from the Christmas is Coming set. You could put this into an aperture in itself with the string going through the middle, and that would be a really nice hanging element on a card. Or, as I say, you can actually add this onto a piece of acetate, and we can make a decoration this way. I'm just bringing my black card again so you can see how I've done. Now this is the piece of acetate that I die cut with that decorative circle die that I showed you earlier on. It is a larger piece than the one that I used earlier, so there's an awful lot of scope into what you can use for this. Now if you did want to have this, we do hang this, we obviously need to create a little hole in here. The obvious thing to use would be a hole punch. I'd just line up your image on the acetate first and just work out where you might want that to be. Now I want the workings of where the ribbon is going to hang to be hidden, so I want it to be underneath the roof of the house. I have a crocodiles, many of you may have these also to create a hole with. If you don't have any tools like that, you don't have a hole punch. Now I'm just sort of going to eyeball there where I want my hole to be, so I'm just going to make a hole there. Now if you don't have any of those tools to make a little hole like that, look through your die cuts. Oh, there we are. Because I'm pretty sure you will find a set where we have these tiny little circle dies that would otherwise be used for the centre of flowers. Tiny little dies like this. I'll just pull them out for too far. You see, you have these tiny little circle dies that would create a tiny little eyelet for you, and there's quite a few sets that have these in. Look at any of your floral sets, I would say. The ones I've picked up just now is the Bloomin' Lovely, so this is probably the most recent set, floral set that would have that in. We have the floral pockets from a good while ago, but this set has centres to flowers, so therefore we have tiny little eyelet dies as well. Also, your nested pocket builder has 2 tiny little eyelets. It has a button size as well, but these would also make perfect little holes for you to thread ribbon through as well. So I'm pretty sure most people will have a set with a tiny little sort of circle die in there. So you'd be able to make yourself a nice little hole. So what have we done with my ribbon? There it is. So before we attach our dies, I'm going to thread my ribbon through there. Make sure that's evened up. I'm using foam pads. They are really, really useful. So you can use foam pads for this. You can also just stick this straight to the acetate, but it might be quite nice to have just that little bit of dimension also. And what I was thinking actually earlier on was I was driving back from the school run this morning actually. It'd be really nice if you was making this as a Christmas decoration to perhaps get a little set of those little wire lights. I haven't got any, but I know I've seen them in other people who've made cards before. Tiny, tiny little sets of wires, little like fairy lights that they must be battery operated, and the battery component must be quite small to fit and hide onto the workings of a card. But I'm sure you could hide the battery unit behind these die cuts somehow, and just somehow attach the fairy lights around the outside, and then you'd get a really lovely glow, wouldn't you, from around the outside of this mushroom house. And that would be a lovely hanging decoration, wouldn't it? I think it'd actually look quite nice on a card as well. But it'd just add another special element and just make it a lot more festive, I reckon. So I'm just adding that second one there, matching up the houses, so obviously when it spins it looks like one image. And we have our ribbon hanging there. Now if I'm hanging this, I don't necessarily think that needs a sentiment, but there's lots of stickers, there's lots of little sentiments that you could use, and you could add on to suit for your occasion. I really enjoyed making those for you today. I think I'll definitely be making a few more of them, and I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Take care everyone.